Thanks for joining us. I am with a couple of very special guests today. Jim, how do I say your surname, Jim?
Just think of I Dream of Genie, and you'll get it, Moginie.
Moginie. We've gotten so carried away with that name at the office. We've got all kinds of incarnations which crack us up. Jim Moginie, best known for his work in Midnight Oil, and current band is The Family Dog. I encourage you to look them up. Also, Christabel Blackman. Hello, Christabel.
Hi.
How are you going?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, I'm great. Yeah, and here on the other side of Australia, speaking to you.
Whereabouts are you?
We're on the east coast, sort of halfway down the east coast. If I've got my laterals right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that painting behind you? Who did that one?
That's one of my paintings.
I thought it might be. For those of you who don't know, Christabel Blackman's been an artist since she was 3 years old, and is quite prolific. But I'm not going to. This isn't the kind of podcast where I list off kind of fabulous introductions. I'd rather let our guests speak for themselves. How am I allowed to ask how long you guys have been interlocked?
About 86 years, is it?
Long enough to lose count.
Less than a decade and more than a year.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by creative pairings. You know, in filmmaking, we've got David and Nadia Tass. They were responsible for one of my favorite films, the Year My Voice Broke. Do you know many other kind of creative couples?
I think a lot of creative people find it hard to not be with other creative people, because essentially we need to be understood in different ways. The creative process, you'd sit, because I am the child of other artists and writer. When someone's just sitting there, they're not just sitting there doing nothing, they're thinking, or they're going through quite a cataclysmic sort of thing in their mind maybe, and other people maybe don't get that. So I think that we're like magnets that kind of find each other in life and need to be together, because that's where we are.
It's lots of actors end up together, and I can see why. Acting is a very particular trade, and not many other people can understand it. So you end up kind of trying to be with people who understand the horror of it.
Is it really? I've got no idea. I couldn't know how to act. I was the worst actor at school. I was the tree in the school pageant when I was 6. And that was sort of when my career stopped in acting.
In my school play, I was the mad professor in the Pink Panther Strikes Again. There was a producer in the audience, and I was out earning my dad within 6 months as an actor.
Walking the road, like, wow.
Yeah, totally. I'm best mates with Gus Leunig. I'm not sure whether you've heard of the Leunig name, Leunig.
I love it.
Right. He's Michael's son, and I remember. And this is kind of what I'm keen to talk to you about, Christabel. I remember that because I grew up with him, and he was a rock and roll guy for a while. He was a muso for a while. He had a number of bands that kind of had their moment, and but he ended up chefing and digging holes, and the music. He got chewed up by the music game, and he ended up deciding to paint. And we were in a particularly difficult phase of our lives. He'd gone through a lot of personal tumult, and I'd just buried my partner. And we moved into a house together, and we were both in extreme pain at the time. And I'll never forget him coming in and saying, "I'm going to paint again." And I said, "Great. Great. How does it look?" He said, "Well, I'm going to do 50 black and whites before I deserve color." And he painted 50 black and whites because he felt like he didn't deserve to paint with colors. That was how he started. He's now exhibiting in Hong Kong and America, and he's got 3 kids, so he gets up at 3:30 in the morning and paints before they get up. and he's incredibly disciplined, which is a lesson to all of the artists out there waiting for it to arrive. But I was just kind of he's ended up with a non-artist, but I am fascinated by people who do paint in particular, Christabel. You've painted since you can remember. I don't really want to talk about who your parents are because I don't think it's got much to do with who you are as an artist, or I hope it doesn't anyway. But I mean, you've grown up around it. You've painted for a long time now. I was in the arts for 23 years and I got tired of it and I moved away and started doing other stuff. What's your relationship with painting and art been like over the years? Has it been tumultuous at times? Have you nearly left it and come back to it, or has it always been something that's nourished you?
Well, I did leave it. I lived my life backwards, really. Like some people say they live for their dream, and when they retire, they sort of move to Europe or whatever. And I did that when I was really young. I went off and lived in Florence when I was in my early 20s and did a crash course in Italian and studied painting conservation, because I used to go to the museums and I was so in love with the paintings I could never be with them long enough. I'd sit there and I'd sort of have all these emotional responses and cry and laugh and giggle and sort of staring at one painting. So I thought, I want to be close and spend more time with them. And so I studied how to restore paintings, and then actually went off and lived in Spain for 25 years and worked basically on Gothic and Renaissance paintings, which was really wonderful. And then I went back into my own painting, sort of, so I did have quite a long break. I painted intermittently, but more or less was just dedicated to restoration and being a mum, being a mother. So that was took up a big part of my life, and it was wonderful. And then I came gradually back into it and have, just stepped back to not where I left off, but, like I said, it's almost like living life backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you describe your relationship with painting?
I think painting is always, it's like a curiosity you have, like the typical thing. It's an itch you always have to scratch. It's something that beckons you, and you sort of, the more you do it, the more you engage with it, and the more it beckons you. That it's like your own form of having had sort of studied and gone into academia a bit. It's a bit like that. You have a sort of an inquiry that you're making to yourself. You're only ever making it to yourself as an artist, really. That it's something that you need to pursue and keep struggling with, or keep dominating, or keep tormenting with. And so that's what keeps you working as an artist, because if you're completely happy and satisfied, which happens sometimes with a painting, then you sort of stop and you go, oh, well, I've done it, But then something comes back and says, oh, what if that was a bit more, how about that narrative of, about that, oh, I just saw the most fantastic tube of yellow, Naples yellow paint. So it's sort of, it keeps grabbing at you.
How do you know when a painting is finished? I know that writers have this problem.
Well, I personally know when I varnish it and sign it. But
yeah.
It's very, and that's the way. That's the way. It's that thing where you sort of, you as an artist, you are the only one who knows. It's in your own mind, or it's in your own ear, or it's in your own dance, or whatever it is.
Is it a clear moment? Do you go, yes, it's like, or does it vary?
Well, I think it varies. Leonardo da Vinci carried around the Mona Lisa on his back. He used to carry it in a box on his back for 8 years while he was painting it. So there's some things that are like that. They're sort of very long, and other things that just sort of pop out and it's quick and it's just great.
And how would you reflect on your career? For anyone who wants to look her up as they're listening, Christabel Blackman, Blackman. How would you describe your work?
My work's narrative in the sense that I offer part of a story, and my intention and hope is that the spectator will create their own part of the story.
Would you do me the honor and explain that one for me in terms of narrative?
Yeah, like this painting, it's a narrative painting in that you can see that it's an image you can recognize, it's figurative, and you can see there's a story of some type going on. Okay, so, you know, what's this story? Has the cat just spilt the wine, or is the cat jumping on the table after dinner's finished, or is there someone coming to the door and it's has people had an argument left in the middle, or is it a scene of love? You know, what is happening there? So that's like, you will look at it and see something there and have
That's
your
right, yeah.
emotional response with a narrative response.
I love the sunglasses. They're my favourite.
So still could be at night.
So it's meant to be, it's an open, so maybe we could describe it as like contemporary narrative art or something like that. So you would rather, I then imagine, forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, you would rather me come to my own story than tell me what yours was, right?
Yeah, you feel it. So, I mean, that's suggestive. I think a lot of things in life, when they're suggestive,
Yeah,
they're creative, it's more exciting than
more interesting.
Or seeing the whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, I'm inviting people who are watching to make their own story around that beautiful piece behind Crystal. I've certainly got my own story, and the cat is the culprit. But when Christabel was saying, you know, when she was suggesting what it could be, it could well be the cat skirting furtively through an aftermath. I really like that too. Make your own choices. That's the brilliance of art. I encourage you to look up Christabel Blackman. I really do. She's an artist of the highest pedigree. She's a great asset for this country, and I thank her for joining us. My mate who chose 50 black and whites before he went to colour, he needed to do that. He hadn't touched paints for a while, and it was I'm not sure what you call it, but it was the passage through which he deemed that he needed to travel. He felt he wasn't ready for colour. And
self-imposed boot camp.
Yeah, well, he certainly had the whip out at the time in our life, Jim. You know, and he was, you know, but I've always thought of that moment in the years afterwards as geez, if you're ever going to take something on, don't walk before you can crawl. And that was the lesson that I gleaned from my mate Gussie doing those 50 black and whites. They were useless to him. He gave them away. I've still got a few.
It's been useful.
What was that?
It must have been useful to him.
Well, it was, and he's so good with his colours now. I really appreciate his use of colour, and I saw that as a necessary step for him. The reason I bring it up again, both Jim and Christabel, is there are a lot of people out there that want to paint. There are a lot of people out there that just wish they could pick up a guitar. Or start on the keys, and I know that there's people listening and watching that have a void because they're not doing the job they love. How do we encourage, and by we I mean you two, and I've mentioned that Gus story for a reason, you know, to mention a starting point to think about. How would you encourage? Because we all need to express ourselves, and so many of us aren't encouraged to do so. How would you encourage people listening or watching, whether it be painting or music? How would you encourage them to break the ice if they're having trouble getting started?
Oh, well, I mean, I started as a fan, really. I mean, I was a huge Beatles fan when I was a kid, and then I started to kind of, I fell in love with a guitar player, a Dutch guy called Jan Akkerman, who, I don't know whether anyone now, but he was, I guess, one of the prog rock warlords of the time, but he wasn't actually, he was more of a jazz player and more of a gypsy sort of player, like Django Reinhardt. He was the other person as well. And I just wanted to emulate that. When I picked up a guitar, I was just inspired. I wasn't sort of, you have to be inspired, I think, to take that first step. And then I went to see him playing live in 1973 in the Horden Pavilion, and the whole atmosphere was full of marijuana smoke. everyone was smoking those days. You could hardly even see the stage. There was blue, like a blue filter on it. And he walked on with a pair of leather pants and a glass of red wine and put it on his amp. And his amp, it was so loud. It was almost unbelievable how loud he was. He had about 12 amplifiers he was playing through. You get that, you know. And he played with so much feeling and his touch and the confidence, but the fact it was a bit rough was really good. I didn't like people who were really perfect guitar players. I like mistakes. And he seemed to enjoy his mistakes, which is the other thing, you know, which is important if you're an artist too. Don't worry about making a mistake, you know, just repeat it and, you know, put a bit of echo on it and you'll be right. And I was so inspired by this guy, I didn't listen to anything else. So I missed out on Led Zeppelin. I missed out on all these other 70s bands. A lot of the things that other people had in their record collections, I didn't know what they were. And then through Jan, who I actually met in 2011, funnily enough, is my hero. And I nearly fainted when I met him. I was so in awe. And here I was like a 55-year-old or wherever it was. And he, in an article in a magazine, he talked about Django Reinhardt. He talked about the English classical guitar player Julian Brim. He talked about Hank Marvin from the Shadows. He talked about Wes Montgomery, the US jazz player. And I went and listened to all of their stuff and got really, especially sucked into Django and sucked into Julian Brim, who just died last year, the greatest classical guitar player there ever was. And then that got me into J.S. Bach. And then that started me thinking about songs and composition. And then I saw that the piano was a good way of playing two things at the same time, bass lines and melody going backwards and forwards. Contrapuntal, I think they call it. Isn't that right? Two lines that are going in opposite directions. Yeah. She's the best classical person I've ever met. She knows more about classical music than anyone I've ever met. Because I don't think you did the rock thing at all.
I thought I was going to learn about music from you.
No. I mean, so I just think if people want to make a start, they've just got to start as a fan and try and emulate. There's something about when you hear a piece of music that just gets in you, and if you want to express that, you have to sort of regurgitate it in some way that kind of might be a carbon copy of it, or it might be a bad copy of it, or a half a copy of it, or anything. But just making that start, it is like you were saying about art. It's like you need to resolve something inside you. It's a question mark. You know, you need to sort of answer that question somehow. Well, I don't know why it becomes a question, but it does, and you just have to play that through. And if you can use your hands to do it, so be it. If you can sing it, great. If you can do it on a drum kit, great. You know, it's all the same, really.
I've started. My dad was an author, and my mum was a poet, and I was raised without a television in a house with 100,000 books in it, and I rebelled against my father. I thought he was an intellectual snob, and he wanted me to become the next Proust, and he had high hopes for me as a writer, and he hated television. He thought it was a narcotic for the masses, which it is. And of course, much to his chagrin, I ended up on commercial television acting. But I have gone back to writing, and I think you're right. I mean, I was as affected by Boy Swallows Universe, written by Trent Dalton, as any of the other hundreds of thousands of people that read it in this country. And all of a sudden, I found myself writing like him. And I even to the point where I used one of his expressions in my book. I realized later, then looked back in Trent's book and realized that I'd just taken that expression. It's called the everywhere grey. They're the two words that I stole unwittingly. I was just so influenced by his writing that when I was describing my high school, you know, the sentence was hard steel railings dissect the everywhere grey. And I realized, oh my God, that's not mine. I didn't write that. And so now I feel like I have to write to him for permission to use those two words. But I'm doing the same, coming back to writing after a long absence. I'm really just concentrating on my reading. I think that's really valuable advice. Yeah, there's a saying going around, and I'd like you guys to reflect on whether it's a truism, given the fact that you've met Jan and Christabel, given the fact that I'm sure you've met many of the artists that you admire. They say don't meet your heroes, because they'll never live up to the ideal that you have of them. Well, I've met a few of my heroes, and I've never regretted it. What do you think about chasing heroes? I mean, if people are really passionate about a particular artist or about a particular person, should they pursue them and try and meet them, or should they just stand back and learn from their work?
Well,
That's a really difficult one, because I've met some extraordinary people who profess to be artists and haven't been much good at it, and other people who are extraordinary artists, and you meet them and you go, oh, what? This is fine.
Yes.
But, I think there's everything. I think there's great artists who are great people as well. So I just don't think there's a blanket rule for that.
Yeah.
I think the most you are going to get from them, probably, unless you have sort of a very forged, strong and intimate relationship with someone, the most you're going to get from them is their work and what they've done. You will get a lot more reading their books or their poetry or watching their films than as a person, unless you're specifically very close to them. And then people can be horrible and wonderful and very lovable at the same time. So, that's it.
I said about Elvis, I said that about him. He's in a truck. As a guy, he was not much, they said, but as an artist, he was extraordinary. And that whole thing, trust the art, not the artist. I think it's true, because I think there's a part of your being that sort of, it's a very precious part of you that cherishes a song or a little bit of poetry or a little bit of painting or something that's very special to you. And so you honour that by loving that person, but to actually meet them, it's a whole other thing. I met Pete Townsend once, and I shook his hand and I was speechless. I couldn't say a bloody thing. I was so, and he just looked at me and went, oh, fuck, what a waste of time, but I mean, anyway, in a chat, and a friend of mine came along to the same gig and came backstage and said, I've just been doing this guy out there sitting on the road case for half an hour. Who was that? I said his name was Pete. So she was talking to Pete Townsend for half an hour, because he just wanted to have a chat with someone. He was like a stammering, mute fool, and I just looked back and I go, oh God, that's so just dreadful. I think you've got to meet your heroes. You've just got to sort of talk to them and say, how you doing? Especially if you go backstage at a gig, because that's sort of always, I never used to do that. And then I started to do it. I had my kids with me and we met David Byrne and we went backstage, and I just thought, I'll meet this guy, And then we were just talking about, he'd been to the Outback and you've been to Kings Canyon, and have you seen the country, and have you seen, a lot of people on tour are lonely and they want to break out and go and meet people from that country and get away from their road crew and their band and everything around them. And I think that's sort of, they're human beings. If you're a bit nervous about going backstage to meet someone, it's a bit silly because people are just like you, and they'd be probably upset if they knew you were there and didn't go back. That's the other thing, because a lot of people who are artists check the door list, oh, did they come to the gig, or they didn't come? Oh, that's, black mark against them.
Now, the reason I wanted to get together for a chat is because you've both been kind enough to contribute. Yeah, you've got your own copy. It arrived. It arrived. Wonderful. I'm so glad it arrived. Thank you both for your contribution. I hope that you're proud to be in the book. Pre-sales went off. It got released commercially yesterday or the day before, and the publisher's already ordered another print run. It looks like you're going to be responsible for helping us raise many hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I wanted to really, really thank you to both of you for writing a letter to Dear Mum. For those who don't know, Dear Mum is a lovingly assembled collection of letters to mums. from Australia's most notable notables. We've got some wonderful people from all kinds of industries in the book, including Jim and Christabel from the art world and the music world. Before we get started, and I kind of hate to do this to you, Jim, and I've been overnight. I didn't know whether to even bring it up. I don't want to be the guy that does this, but at the same time, I have a huge curiosity. That I want to deal with before we read our letters. Just fob me off, Jim. Just fob me off, Jim, if it's just too tacky.
Nothing's too tacky for me, mate.
I'm a Midnight Oil fan. I had your albums on LP. I love your band. And I think it's an incredibly important part of Australia's story, as indeed do I think is your work, Christabel. I was in showbiz, let's say showbiz, and Peter Garrett was in showbiz. I left to do something bigger, and I think Pete left to do something bigger as well. And without, we can just handle this very quickly. It's just, and I'm not asking for the sake of the listeners. I'm asking for me so I can actually email you it if you don't want to talk about it on this. But he's back doing his music now, right? And everybody's glad to have him back. I can't help but feel personally that he got chewed up a bit in Canberra. And that he would have gone and you know, with the best of intentions to try and affect such positive change. And so he went to Canberra and he became a politician. And and the problem with becoming a politician is you have to toe the party line. And so this guy that had become, like, for me growing up, I mean, I wouldn't have heard of Jabiluka without him, or I wouldn't have known. Like, he taught me to care about my environment. He taught me, you know, he taught me so much, and as did you. But him as the front man, here I am thinking, you know, that he was the guy teaching me that. And, you know, little did I know how much of the stuff you were writing, and he went and spent a good 2-3 decades in public life doing other things. Now that's what I've done. So we've got a similar kind of story. We started in showbiz. We ended up going into kind of more kind of helpy stuff. and now we're coming back to the original form of art. I can't help but feel he's more effective in Midnight Oil. And I can't help but feel that if he had have stayed with the band, even though I'm not suggesting that the band's Genesis hasn't been wonderful, and the way it's panned out has been fabulous. And but I felt strongly that if he had have never left to go to Canberra, that he could have affected more people positively through his music. I don't want you to talk about him. I want you to talk about, like, me or anyone else contemplating that. I'm kind of going back to acting and back to writing. I'm still doing my advocacy work though. And of course, as an individual, I'm worried about where I'm best suited. And because I watched him get chewed up a little, and I'm wondering, because politics scares me, I'm wondering whether I should just stay away from all of that kind of stuff and concentrate on what I'm good at.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's the point that he left. I think he turned 50.
Yeah.
He'd realised if he was going to do something, now was the chance to have a run. The band was at a point where we'd had a lot of hit records in the 80s, and then we went through the 90s and didn't have that many towards the end of it. And we were playing smaller and smaller venues. We're going around in circles, in ever decreasing circles around Australia. And there was a certain grimness to the proceedings, really, in a sense, in terms of, were we ever going to recapture those heights of fame? And that's partly when you get into your 40s and you're in a band in the music business, and you've been around for a while, you're like wallpaper, people just sort of ignore you. which is just the nature of it, really. It's not that it's unfair, it's just the way people are. So he went off into that, and in a way what he did was to take the message of the band and we all wrote together, and also his advocacy in the ACF and on the board of Greenpeace and other things he was involved in. The Jabaluka thing was, as you mentioned. He just took that to the next level. It just showed to me that he was really serious about what he was talking about. It wasn't like someone outside the Parliament, with a placard going, down with this sort of thing, or you're a bastard, or what you get with people. He realised that maybe a midnight oil band meeting was more difficult to run than a meeting between land care, farmers and environmentalists. With the band meeting, it's like, oh, no, I'm not. I'm not going to make a decision. Sort of. He realised that sort of that was quite difficult. It's sort of, to his credit, he did that, and even though I think you're right, he did become. Everyone thought he was a white knight on a steed riding into Canberra to sort of save the world, but it's not like that,
Well, we found that out, didn't we?
Well, it's just that's what it is, like if you go to a party like the Labor Party. I mean, I had great hopes, and I think he did great work. He did the Mary River. He saved that. He did a lot of work with, the Whaling Commission in South America. There was a big conference there, and he stood against Japan. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that he did. No one ever talks about because they always talk about the scandal about the bats, which was all in the papers and Murdoch and the whole thing, putting the boot in. And I don't think he was very supported by Kevin Rudd. I think he got stabbed in the back. That's the other thing, which I don't mind talking about because I think it's public knowledge. And I think but he always loved music and he always loved to tune. And even though he had that part of his brain still in Canberra, you become so responsible, and he has changed as a person through that experience. I mean, he's much more, what's the word? I can't really think of a word for it. He's the same guy, but he's more super organised and a great leader. And at the band meetings, he can sort of push it, win. But I mean, it's like, it's a different thing. It's like his advocacy just turned into a real sort of advocacy, even though it was flawed. I don't think the fact he went there in the first place was wrong. I totally understand the need to sort of help and not be a lobbyist, but be actually in there with your hands on the levers. That's a whole different ballgame. There's not many people that I know that have really done that. And apart from people who are just party people from the word go, when they were teenagers, they joined the party. I mean, his parents handed out how to vote Labor cards at Linfield Public School, and he was handing them out too when he was a kid. So it makes total sense that he did go with the Labor thing. So,
I mean, obviously it's going well, but do you love being back together?
Yeah, it is good. It's like being kind of we've all grown up a bit, and they say sometimes that if it's like the jigsaw puzzle when you're young, and when you're older, you put the pieces back together, they don't quite fit together the same.
Yeah.
Like, I think you've got to get a hand.
Yeah.
But it's a learning process. It's like it's bigger than all of us. It's sort of it's a bigger thing than all of us put together. And when you walk on there, it's a pretty glorious noise and a great thing to celebrate. All the things we've written together, the music, that we've created over the years. It's 13 albums or whatever it is, some mad amount of stuff. That to go and see people seem to like it. So I don't know, like just lead me to the stage, Valentino or whatever, just get up there, and it's because it's like it's who you are. It's like, it'll be on my tombstone anyway, probably, he was in Midnight Oil, but I mean, it is that, but it is also other things. You can be other things too, like you're alluding to with your activism and then your acting and writing stuff. You can do all of it. People are much more complex than meets the eye. You don't have to be one thing or the other. I just think you got to embrace the whole thing, because it's like, your activism influences your art, and then your art influences your activism. So, and that's what Midnight Oil did all along as well. It's like the songs kind of were the Trojan horse for the activism. That the ideas were big ideas, and people could find themselves singing along to a song they didn't even agree with the politics of it. They'd be dancing to Beads of Burning, and they had never thought about Aboriginal people before.
Yeah.
That was the trick. It's like making melodic songs and with good riffs and great beats and kind of like
and a killer message.
Yeah, push the message through and sort of, and it was always more about having a conversation with our audience than beating them over the head with it, although some people disagree. But I think it was always about having a conversation and not telling people what to think. You know, like it was like, well, what do you think? You know, that's what our thing always was. You know, what do you reckon? You know, here it is. Like here's Pauline Hanson, and here's often albums would coalesce around a theme, whether it was an environmental thing or whether there's a few things we did on Indigenous issues early on, before people were kind of doing that, really, apart from the Aboriginal people themselves who were doing it before and doing great stuff. So it was all, and the people we met through doing that, this is the thing with you're talking about too, the activism, we started to meet people that we felt aligned with as people. So early on we met people like people from Greenpeace and people from Save the Whales and people from Amnesty and Surfrider Foundation, and we were doing benefits for them because no one else would have us anyway. You know, they wanted us there. You know, the industry didn't want to know about this weird music with this bald guy running around. You know, they were like, before we had kind of hit records and all that.
Yeah.
I think it was forged us in the fire a bit that we kind of found those people and realised that we had alliances with them that were real human alliances, and we liked what they were on about. You know, Bob Brown, another one. You know, so it's always sort of this sort of thing, a dance with the sort of the ideas and the music, you know, and the politics and the music, I suppose you could say. But I think you can have both. You know, there's been a great history about activism and music when you go right back to the beginning, Woody Guthrie or people before that, and all the way through with protest music and you know, Clancy Brothers, or, you know, there's all been subliminal messages in some songs as well. And now that people have done it more obviously, so it can work, you know. It's like, and it gets, you're talking about the real rather than the fantasy, which is fine too. I mean, I'm a sucker for a good tune. I don't know what Ichiku Park's about, but I love it. You know, it's a great tune, great production, great band. But, you know, I'm a sucker for a good song, like anyone. But I think if you can make a song about something that means something in a real way, then it might last the test of time more than one that's a bit sort of whatever, or a bit phantasmagorical. Although that can work too. So it's all the same thing. It's just art.
Before we jump into Dear Mum, Christabel, any advice for budding artists, for budding painters?
Well, one of the things that happened in the COVID lockdown, is that my daughter, who's Spanish, my children are Spanish, got stuck in Australia. She came out and she was about to go off travelling, and, you know, had a flight sort of the next day kind of thing, and she got stuck here. And she instantly sort of lost the little job she had, and the gym closed down, and she didn't know anyone here, and it's just her and the cat. And she started painting, because that's what she'd studied at university, to paint, but she'd done that sort of all her life. But then she took it on and really worked on it, and she's doing really beautiful artworks. And so my advice is, give it time, you know, work on it. It's what you were saying before about your friend working in black and white. Set yourself something simple, do a drawing every day. The black and white thing is great because it's very polarized, and he probably did it to polarize his thoughts. So it's like, do I feel this or do I feel that? And the black and white drawing does that. All you need is a pen and a little sketchbook or a piece of paper. And when you do a drawing, it's a meditation, but it's also, you're learning, the process is happening all the time, which is what Cézanne used to say. He kept painting Mont Saint-Victoire over and over and over again. He said, every time I lay down a brushstroke, I've changed, the mountain has changed, my feeling, you know, what I've learned from art has changed. So you're only going to get that if you work at it. So just work every day, and take it up. And you don't have to have a big studio. You don't have to, you just work. And then the other advice, one more piece of advice is, if you want to start painting, don't go and buy a set of paints. Go and choose 6 colours that speak to you, that you really like, and paint with those. Don't get a standard set of colours, because it's not a good idea when you first start.
Yeah. That would serve as too much of a deterrent for me. I think that's a great piece of advice. Would both of you be happy to read your letters to your mum? How would you feel about that?
That's okay.
Yeah. Christabel, you've got the book in your hands by the look of things. Would you like to go first? We're about to hear from Christabel Blackman, who has been kind enough to write a letter to her mum for our compendium of letters. Dear Mum. Thanks, Christabel.
Dear Mum, letters were a way for you to see the world beyond your blindness. From an early age, I read to you my own bedtime stories and nursery rhymes, instructions on the bottle of tame to rid me of my tangles, school homework or teachers' reports, doctors' scripts, even the phone ledger, names for party lists, numbers for calls, and flower packets, plain or self-raising. Then I read your personal and business mail to you, leaving correspondence from close friends, till last as a treat. The interpretation of handwritten scripts was not always an easy task to decipher. Keep the stamps, throw it away, pay it, file it, don't have an opinion, obey. Later, I read your manuscripts over and over and over again to you, editing the punctuation, grammar, spelling. The carbon paper was in back to front. Fingers were on the wrong keys for a whole page. Charged with emotion, the first letter I ever wrote to you was from that cold-hearted retreat with the nuns in an icy English seaside town. I was 4. Gloomy composure resulting from the whole devastatingly cold experience manifested itself in my desperate sense of hope derived from a postage stamp dispatched to us singularly on a Sunday after Mass. Graduating on to reading your letters to me, I was alone. Life had distanced us physically. The thud in the letterbox, sometimes 20 pages of your thoughts, engagements and interludes with people, windows into your world. The care packs of books you sent me over several decades of linguistic exile in Spain kept my reading alive, relevant, contemporary, and in English. Letter writing became a habit, a hobby, an addiction almost, a connection with the distant homeland. It was a bridge slow to cross, with a reliably capricious and untrustworthy delivery service at home in Spain. My own letters to you were always read aloud by someone who inevitably shared any intimacy that was enfolded into their depths. The letter for you was a document, leading to the publication of a book of lifelong correspondence with my godmother, Judith Wright, and to that famous collection of manuscripts by Australian writers which toured libraries nationally. Brava, 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 Barbara. We now have nothing to say in letters, or too much to say to bother writing it all down. There are no more letters between us. With love from your one and only daughter, Christabel.
Thank you.
Very good.
Says so
Well,
much.
really got me too.
Says so much. Got me. We're now going to hear from Jim.
I just wanted to add something about
Please.
creative work. It's like I just think you've got to make time for it. That's the trouble at the moment. You just if I have half an hour and I just go to the piano and just play, I'm not even thinking it's work. I just go and I'm there with my hands on the keys. Things start to happen sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, but you just don't judge it. You just do it and you just feel it through your body, because it's, even after 10 minutes of doing that, you're going to start feeling good. And it would be the same, I'd imagine, with painting and drawing. You just allow time for it. It's not about, oh, I'm going to write a hit song, because that could.
Oh yeah, I've got to do my 1,000 words a day.
Anyway, I'm going to be like James Joyce. No, you just sort of do your thing and have a notebook and write it down, or a voice recorder or something. But just write it down, and the book's better, and then you can see where you crossed it out later, and maybe that wasn't a good thing to cross out. So it's just part of that process to collect those ideas, and then songs will come from that, if you're talking about music. So that's my way of work.
Indeed.
Right. Do you want me to read my letter now?
I'd love that, James.
Okay. Dear Mum, I had two mothers, the birth one who made me, and the adoptive one who made me a life. From the first one, I got the nature. No, it's not so much the nurture. I was lucky to meet you before you died, and found out that you love Slim Dusty like me, and that no one had a bad word to say about you. You must have loved my father, because you went on to have 5 more children with him. Thank you for giving me a chance to walk on the earth, and the chance to play music, meet Slim, form Midnight Oil, and get to stick it up John Howard at the 2000 Sydney Olympics. My adoptive mum was kind, funny, and never had a bad word for anybody. When I was a child, she read the Women's Weekly for styling tips, Charmaine Cliff's column in the Herald for women's business, Maggie Tabara as well. We tuned into Beauty and the Beast on ATN 7, where the women panellists always outfoxed the grumpy and outnumbered host. One day on King Street, Sydney, while driving the Valiant, we nearly ran over one of the beasts, a jaywalking Stuart Wagstaff. She thinks it's funny. Thanks, Mum, for the space food sticks, as we were told on the TV that the NASA astronauts ate them on the Apollo. When you lost Dad, it didn't take you long to get back on track, age 77. And thanks for the Vicks Vapor Rub and the Lucozade. You were there for us through every tedious school gala, nightmare, push bike, stack, and fever. So that makes you the real mum. Love from Jim. Or Jamie, as I was called him.
Dear Mum, it's available now at loveyoursister.org. Click on market and grab a copy from us, not your retailer. Grab a copy from us. Much more will go to cancer vanquishment. James, Christabel, I hope that we get a chance to chat again. And I thank you for your time. And my only aim in doing these chats is to learn stuff, and I've learned more stuff than I normally do when I have these chats. Thank you.
You're doing great work, my friend. And just keep on rocking. That's all it is.
I'm going to pay for a ticket to come and see you play. I'm not the kind of guy that wants freebies. So next time you're near me, I'm going to come and hassle you. I'm going to try and talk my way through security and see if I can't find you backstage, James. As for you, Christabel, if I see your work in Melbourne anywhere, I'm going to take a photo of me with it and send it to you, okay?
That's wonderful.
Happy days, mate.
That's great, yeah.
Much love.
See you, Sam.
Thank you for your time.
Well done.
Thank you.